And finally, meet Saurabh Sengupta, the founder of the Sales Design Institute, a firm that is focused on organizing all things sales. Saurabh was responsible for scaling sales at one of the first unicorns of India, Zomato, over a period of 6 years. He was the 12th employee in the company and scaled a 30-member sales team to 350 plus globally. Before Zomato, Saurabh has worked in various sales roles in engineering, Larsen and Toubro, Sulzer, and consulting sector, Aon Hewitt. Saurabh is a chemical engineer from the Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, and a PGDM from IIM Indore. On to this session with Saurabh.
Saurabh, welcome to the Extraordinary Outcomes Show and this special segment, Fixing the 5% Conversion Problem in B2B Sales. I'm so glad that I could finally get you on because I think the perspective from India is what was sort of missing in this series that we have been doing. We've spoken to a lot of experts from North America, from Australia, from Europe, uh, and we just sort of are warming up to the Indian side of the story. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Subhanjan, for having me. It's a pleasure.
Before we actually dive in, tell a bit about yourself and the work that you are doing.
All right. For the last 4 years, I've been running Sales Design Institute. The name is a little bit misleading. We don't actually run an institute, but you know, we had thought of this name because someday we intend to make some difference in the field of sales education. As of now, the service that we provide is a B2B sales lead generation service. We've been doing this for the past 2 years, and before that, we were providing sales consulting services, primarily to startups as well as modern organizations, organizations with modern products, tech products. So, in the course of the last 4 years, I happened to meet uh, a lot of founders and CEOs of companies, upwards of 200 in the last 4 years. Though we as an organization did not do projects with all of them, but just conversations with such companies gives you a lot of insight as to what's going on there, especially when we have to see from a sales perspective, we have to look at things like the funnel, right, and etc. So that's really where I'm coming from, and in today's talk also that's is going to be my perspective.
Wonderful. So let's dive right in. There is this elephant in the room, what we call the sales room, which we somehow don't talk about enough, even if we do talk at all. And from my talks with various experts and founders and industry leaders, it is as if this is the given. This is what's the best that we can do, which is this 5% conversion problem in B2B sales. So you're generating leads, uh, tons of them, but you're converting a minuscule number. Uh, of course, there are n number of issues around. But my first question to you is, sort of from what you have seen and what interaction you have had, what got us here? Why is it that we are accepting a 5% success rate as an acceptable number?
Um, so off the bat, there's a couple of things that come to my mind. The first thing that comes to my mind is that um, in today's world, especially if we talk about founders, and I think I will also include CEOs of certain companies uh, who are not from a sales background, and they primarily belong to a product background. Now, that product could be a software. It could also be, a physical product or a service. Very few CEOs in India that I see actually belong to a go-to-market background, barring few CEOs in traditional companies, as in insurance, etc., who have done that before. Um, I think this is one of the biggest reasons why sales tends to be taken for granted.
Hmm.
And when it gets taken for granted, it obviously means that that amount of dissection is not done into what is the shape of the funnel, um, that is leading to the final outcome. Um, the leadership team tends to be more concerned about the bottom of the funnel, the final conversion, the outcome, and not really focused on what's happening in the middle and the top of the funnel, as long as we're meeting the numbers. The day the numbers are not met for a couple of months or a couple of quarters consistently, that's when the dissection happens. And unfortunately, that dissection is not in the form of some sort of an intellectual inquiry. That dissection is more in the form of let's, change our sales leadership.
Yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah.
So I think this is somewhere in the background of why this mindset has come about. I
Hmm.
feel primarily. I mean, there could be other reasons, but this to me is the dominant one.
So let's unpack this thought a bit. So one side there are CEOs who are not sort of coming up from the sales side of the business. So these are essentially product guys or management guys who have come to occupy the CEO's chair. So that's one part of it. But what is happening with the sales leadership themselves? I mean, if I say, okay, let me keep the CEO out, and there can be a lot of reasons why the CEO should be in, but for the sake of this discussion, if we say, let's keep the CEO out, let's focus on the sales leadership. What's going on there?
Okay, with the sales leadership, so I'll just divide it into two parts. First, I'll talk about the modern day sales leadership, which are coming in the form of young companies, new products, startups, etc. There, I feel what's happening is that a lot of the sales talent who's coming up into these sales leadership roles um, actually have not worked in a process-driven environment before joining
Hmm,
these roles.
hmm,
Um, as opposed to, for example, if somebody's worked in the telecom or the FMCG world, or even the insurance world for even about 5 to 10 years, and then coming on and taking a leadership role in a modern tech company, let's say, um, they have really I mean, these companies usually have a process and a software of measuring the funnel. Right.
hmm,
So at all points in time, their diagnosis is very data driven. They measure the shape of the funnel. They do analysis of lost clients. They are constantly looking at reasons why, at certain stages of the funnel, deals are dropping off, and so on and so forth. So it's a very data driven environment, right? So when they come into their new role of a sales leadership in the tech world, um, they are actually able to implement those things over here. Um, but unfortunately, that's a very minuscule portion of the talent in the modern day sales leadership. Most of them are coming from backgrounds where they have actually, for the lack of a better word, managed large sales teams.
hmm,
They are good at the human part of it. They're good at hiring. They're good at maintaining. But the concept of capturing data,
hmm,
sanitizing it, and putting it in the form of funnel, and then actually measuring it is not being done enough by the sales leadership. And I think it's purely an insight problem. If they were to know that we can run sales in this way, you know, uh, like they run it in the US, right? I mean, they don't even think about starting off a sales team without having Salesforce in place and measuring, or HubSpot, or measuring the funnel, basically. I think India, in India, it's just about starting. I think we'll get there. Earlier, I used to think we'll get there in 10 years, but I think the way it's going, especially after the pandemic, I think we'll get there in 5 years.
So I have two questions. I mean, one is that companies which are using very detailed data-driven approach, including the US and the developed, I'll say developed countries, okay? So the developed markets, and so to say. It's not that their conversion rates are significantly higher, by the way. Uh, the Forrester data shows that it is in B2B sales, and depending upon geography or the industry vertical that you are talking of, it varies between 1.8 and 7.8%. Of course, there are outliers. You can always pick up one particular company and say, hey, these guys are converting 20%, or these guys are converting 30%, and so on. I'm sure there are outliers in any scenario. But if you take the average out, there's still single digit conversion, right? So I am sort of I shudder to think what would be the conversion rate in these where they're not even looking at the data and going by gut or going by traditional, okay, there is a database we have acquired and now start cold calling them and so on and so forth, or do a mail campaign. And in India, if you're sitting, I know how many cold mails you get every day, right?
Right.
It's potentially a lot for anybody who is in a decision
Yes.
making position. So the point I'm trying to make is that it's not that data itself or being
Mhm.
data driven itself is really solving the problem. It's not that 90% of the companies who are doing data analysis of churn, of drop, of whatever you call it, uh, is actually converting 30%. That's not the case. The other part is a lot of this whole thing is driven by the frontline soldiers, the SDRs, right? So the sales
Right.
leadership is like 2 or 3 steps away from the SDR. Uh, these folks who are coming from a data-driven, uh, environment, is there enough pass on or training or workshopping that is happening to sort of sensitize people that, hey, if we do this, our our conversion rates may go up.
Yeah. Yeah, good point actually. As you, when I compare, let's say, India and the US markets, I'm sure, I mean, their conversion rates are also in single digits. And you can only imagine that if they are sitting at a 9% conversion, we could be sitting at about a 2 or 3%.
That's right.
Right. So that I agree. So
Hmm.
it's really I mean, there's difference in between those single digits as well. See, as far as the SDRs are concerned, I think we are still um, at the front line, um, 0 to about 2 to 3 years experience. We are still not uh, sort of a sales culture country yet. When I say sales culture, I feel sales roles are still looked down upon.
Hmm.
Number two, a lot of young people, who would not get a job somewhere else would end up joining sales. It's more out of desperation. And the third thing is when they join, they are expected to hit the road without any ramp up time because
Right.
companies simply don't have time and they're always running against time. Um, Now, the funny part is that even in places where I've seen training being imparted, at the time they are being inducted, there also they fall short for the simple reason that, for example, if they're expected to talk to SMBs, they can still pull it off,
Hmm.
right? These are not I mean, these are relatively simpler conversations which mimic our everyday conversations. Let's say you
Hmm.
talk to a shop. So, as we keep going from SMBs towards large organizations, SDRs struggle simply because they're unable to put themselves in the shoes of somebody who's in a middle management or leadership role.
Right.
And the primary reason I think for that is that they have had no exposure to the business world, how it looks uh, at what a person thinks,
Hmm.
what a buyer thinks when they are in the leadership role or a middle management role. How they look at buying products
Hmm.
and services, whether they have researched or not. So entry level SDR tends to treat everybody as if um I'm the only person who knows, and the person on the other side is a clean slate,
Hmm.
which is not true. And there's hardly anybody to sensitize them on that. That you're talking to people who know their game, right? They know their business.
Hmm.
Don't talk to them as if they don't know anything.
Hmm.
And that's where a disconnect happens. I mean, you're not even able to get into the technicalities of discussing. You're not able to do a discovery. You're not able to get inside. I mean, negotiation is very far. You're not even able to do proper discovery.
Hmm.
So what life looks like for a buyer at the middle management and senior leadership role is also one of the reasons why a lot of SDRs struggle. And I think this is now sort of a very pervasive phenomenon across all
Hmm.
sectors that I'm noticing.
Yeah, it's an interesting point because the same thing I hear echoed in most markets that I'm talking to, that what is expected of the SDR is actually a very advanced response, right? And we are still, I mean, our response of the conversion rate going down is throw more of the same thing at the problem. So do robocalls and stuff like that. And SDRs, I mean, put a cheap body there because then I can put a lot of those cheap bodies out there, and somehow it will help me sift through the thousands of leads that I'm generating and will help me zero in on those who are potentially likely to be in a position to sort of take a call. And the other thing that's contributing sort of there is that we are mostly getting driven quarter to quarter, right? So these numbers that we need to achieve, and which is where, to my mind, a big disconnect is. And please tell me if you see the same thing. Nobody's working long term. Nobody's saying, "Hey, I'm going to start nurturing these 100 accounts, and I'm expecting to make a sale next year fourth quarter or next year third quarter. I'm going to go and really understand because we can solve some problems for them. It's part of their industry, the way their industry is moving. We will sensitize them to that opportunity or the problem and whatever, and we're going to walk with them for the next 12 or 15 months before actually they have an internal consensus. Hey, we need to buy this ERP software, we need to do this, or we need to do that, and we become an automatic choice at that point, not to buy but to talk to. uh, and this disconnect between short term and long term possibly potentially is contributing heavily towards this, you know just spray and pray kind of.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you, actually. It was actually after so many years, about a month ago, actually, I was having a call with the founder of a large SaaS company.
Mhm.
And for the very first time, I heard from a founder saying that, look, Saurabh, we know that our sales cycle is about 18 months long.
Hmm.
So we actually have a separate team who's working on, you could call it a pre-sales or a business development. And then there is another separate team who's working on converting the more near-term ones, 1 or 2 quarters. So I definitely agree with you that this is happening a lot. It happens specifically in companies, where they have a short sales cycle.
Hmm.
And you're being generous when you say quarter to quarter. I would actually say month on month, right?
Yeah.
It's optimization on month to month, and the root of the problem starts with lack of annual planning in sales.
Hmm.
Annual planning in industries like telecom, FMCG, insurance, etc., FMCD. It, I mean, I cannot even think of somebody or a leadership team proceeding to go ahead and implementing the sales plan without having the annual plan in place.
Hmm.
That I think with modern organizations and a lot of organizations nowadays, irrespective of whether which sort of product or service they are, whether they're a legacy organization or not, I see lack of annual planning. So if you don't have an annual planning, you don't have an annual number. If you don't have an annual number, you don't have numbers for 4 quarters. The only thing that you're left with is the number for the immediate month and the immediate quarter, and we'll see after that what happens. Right.
Hmm.
Right. I think this fact is also exacerbated by this fact that a lot of companies nowadays rely on external funding.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
they obviously have short-term milestones to meet. Okay?
Yeah.
I've felt, and this has been an internal point of view from sales design for quite some time, um, that sales organization design can actually help solve these problems where there is one sale part of the sales organizations that is looking at um, converting more of the mature or hot leads, as uh, some people call it. While there is another pre-sales or a business development team, or you can call it, some people call it an evangelizing team. They are, I mean, they're as you can, in fact, call them a marketing team.
Hmm.
They are the ones who are nurturing uh, leads to fill the top of funnel. in the longer term, in the 1 to 1.5 year horizon.
Hmm.
There is no way that the same team can pull off both these priorities.
Yeah.
So our point of view has been for quite some time, and we see organizations doing it now, is to split the team into two parts or sometimes three parts and give them targets on separate timelines. So the marketing team or the pre-sales team would have a timeline of about 1 year as far as the targets are concerned.
Hmm.
The account executives would then have shorter term targets, and these two teams, this team would feed into this one,
Hmm.
right? But of course, not enough of it is being done, and I think one of the biggest reasons why it's not being done is because not a lot of people know that this might be a solution.
Hmm.
Organization design and then KPI design accordingly could be a solution. If you give it to the same team, they're not going to be able to prioritize between the
Interesting. Quick question from the customers that you work with or the customers that you do not finally work with, how many come to you for a short-term fix and how many are coming to you for a long-term design-based fix?
two. More than 90% is short term.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I
I
don't blame them.
No, no, we are not blaming at all. We are really talking about the state of the industry, and
Yes.
I think a bit. I mean, I'm a SaaS founder, but I think availability of tech and the kinds of promises tech is trying to make is also contributing towards this whole idea. Oh, we need to buy this tech, and that will take care of this problem, and it can fix our issues, right? So as if just go and buy a bunch of softwares or services, and I'm doing a great disservice to myself, but but that's okay, because that's the truth. People think that, oh, tech is a panacea. Get intent data and you will find out who is going to buy tomorrow. It's really not going to work that way. It really doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
uh,
Doesn't.
so I
I think
yeah, yeah,
no, my comment on that is that software is eating the world has become a fashionable statement to say nowadays.
yeah, yeah.
And while that is true, in a sense, what is also true is that most of these software, which are supposed to be productivity software, which are
Hmm,
supposed to help teams, CRM software, account-based marketing software, if one were to do a survey and start checking the usage that
hmm,
sales teams are actually making of these softwares,
hmm.
that's again single digit.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
Right?
I agree.
So yeah,
That's
on
a good one to do actually. We should sort of talk about it and figure out what really people are doing with their tech stack and how they're managing their tech stack. Not, I mean, there's a lot of talk about how you are managing, rationalizing the buying and purchasing of the tech stack, but nobody's talking of how well it is being used and integrated and so on. Uh, so sort of, if you have to sort of wrap up this section of the talk and say these are the key issues why we are stuck at such a low conversion rate, what would you say then?
okay. I'll go point wise,
Hmm.
and I like to always go, shape of funnel wise.
Okay.
That's my preferred way of going. I think at the top of the funnel, number one, companies need to start realizing that there is a funnel, it needs to be measured.
Hmm.
If you're not going to measure it, you'll never get scientific insights as to
Yeah.
what's going on, right? Why the number is 5% or 6%, why is it that?
Yeah.
Number two is at the top of the funnel. I think over a period of time, I mean, I can understand the startups, etc. They're new to the market. They've not identified their customer profiles or
Hmm.
their target industries or the size of the industry. Some logical way of slicing and dicing their target market and finding out who their ideal customers are,
Hmm.
right? And that ideal customer can also change from time to time, but being aware of that at any point in time. I think because of that, a lot of spray and pray happens when it is left up to the frontline SDR to find out who is likely to buy, whereas they don't have any guidelines on, why don't you go and target X industry or Y industry, and why you should leave behind Z industry.
Hmm.
They are bound to make their own judgments. So what's happening there at the top of the funnel is a lot of leads entering the top of funnel, which we know are never going to have. I mean, there's not even going to be a use case for our product over there.
Hmm.
So I see a lot of those junk coming uh, across the board on the top of the funnel, right? So defining ideal customer profiles. In the middle of the funnel, of course, there is this whole process of discovery and diagnosis, which I feel young SDRs struggle at, because of the reason I mentioned in the first place, that they're not able to put themselves in the shoes of the buyer. And by the way, I believe that it is should not be left solely up to their intelligence to figure out the mind of the buyer.
Hmm.
Sales leadership and company leadership has to mimic that, share their experiences, and tell them how middle and top management people who are likely to be their buyers think of. They're not going to be able to figure out,
Hmm.
right? This whole process of discovery and diagnosis of the problem, talking about it at length, uh, uh, which obviously needs a lot of training effort. Right?
Hmm.
That needs to be fixed internally at the middle of the funnel, right? And at the bottom of the funnel is obviously a lot of negotiation skills and ability to close things off. And if you were to ask me to rank these three things, I would today put almost 50 to 60% of the my emphasis on the top of the funnel, because once that starts improving,
Yeah.
um, I've seen middle and the bottom improving. Also, things like training, etc., take time to bring about the intended effect, whereas
Hmm.
things at the top of the funnel can be fixed faster.
I completely agree. In fact, I think one of my personal favorite thoughts is that we need to start thinking of the funnel as a pipe and no longer as a funnel. We have to sort of get to where whoever gets into my pipe gets out of the other side, and we don't lose anything. See, this whole idea that we can put in a lot of people at the top, and I don't mind if I get just 1% of them out at the bottom. I think that sort of is plaguing the approach, and that was okay, 20 years back, but today it doesn't make sense anymore. Anyway, let's move on to the solution. You have sort of touched upon the solution while you were talking about the problem. So if you want to sort of write down a prescription,
Yes.
how do you have better conversion? Because just going from 5 to 10%, which is like
Hmm.
100% jump, just going from a
Hmm.
single to a double digit can make the efficiency like 100 150% for organizations, depending
Yes.
upon where they are in that single digit scale, right?
Right.
So what would you be suggesting uh, people do, organizations do, sales leaders do to fix it?
Sure. So slightly longish answer, Subhanjan.
Sure.
This is where again, our point of view comes into the picture, which is sales design, right?
Hmm.
It's also our company's name, but it's also the concept on which we operate, right? So I want to share with you the 6 elements of sales design, which,
Hmm.
according to us, if handled well, will be able to sort of fix this 5% problem to a certain extent.
Hmm.
Um, See, traditionally, what we've seen is sales is not looked at as a design problem.
Hmm.
It's being looked at as a problem where you throw warm bodies and you expect some outcome to come because of that. Now, I find that as a huge problem, and we have got to look at sales as a design problem. So, the first element of sales design, as we call it, is getting the sales process in place, which means the sequential steps which every SDR or AE is expected to follow, and approximately 70 to 80% adherence to the process. If they want to change the process, want to make any changes, let's sit at the round table, let's discuss those, and only then those we put. It's almost like a military kind of a regime. Not to say that we are taking away the creativity because of this process, that still remains, but there has to be a tried and tested sequential steps that people need to follow. For example, one of the fastest way to pick up a tried and tested process is to get the top 10% of the salespeople into the room,
Hmm.
ask them what their secret sauce is, uh, document that, find out commonalities, and then train the rest of the batch into
Absolutely.
it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in this process, one doesn't even need to go outside, look for a consultant to do this. I mean, the answer is already inside the team, right?
Hmm.
So sales process design is the first element. The second element is what we call as content and messaging, right? Um, we believe that content and messaging again is something that is left up to the salesperson to decipher. I
Yeah.
mean, every new batch of salespeople who comes in has to decipher it on their own. Now, that is a lot of loss, right? That's a lot of frictional loss over there.
Yeah.
Um, what you'd rather have is, and nowadays it's so easy to do this. I mean, you can make audios and videos of mock conversations between buyers and sellers. Right? And
Yeah.
so all you do is you prepare an entire YouTube playlist of how your typical conversations look like,
Hmm.
product wise, industry wise, price point wise,
Hmm.
etc. And just ask people in their induction program to go through those videos 3 times.
Yeah.
Right? So they get those typical impact words and verbiage on in place. I have personally noticed that not just people in our country, but globally, uh, people remember more when they see videos and audios
Yeah.
as opposed to PPTs and documents.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
So sales content and messaging again can be picked up from best practices from the top 10% of the salespeople as well as the sales leadership. Because you and I both know it that there's a certain verbiage, a certain kind of keywords, a certain sequences, which always tend to work more than
Hmm.
others. The third part of sales design is obviously sales organization design. One small example that I touched upon 10 minutes ago was about how to split the team into 2 or 3 parts and get them to pursue leads of a certain cycle, right? So the marketing and pre-sales team works on a 1 year horizon, whereas the account executives work more on a quarter to or a half year horizon. Um, Obviously, a lot of effort needs to go into this, regarding choice of people, regarding their compensation, regarding the goal setting, right? And wherever like you have sales incentives, that too. Um, but people sticking to their role there and just focusing on the timeline that they have been given. Right? I think goal setting forms a very, very critical part of org design, not just the kind of people one hires. Um, so the moment we will see horses for courses, that you have the right kind of people for the short cycle quarter one and the marketing people slightly longer one, more patient, of course, willing to go out there and make multiple conversations. I think it will definitely have an impact at the bottom of the funnel and will be more
Hmm.
consistent. The fourth element of sales design, which I would recommend, is to get the automation or the CRM portion right.
Hmm.
Um, Although it's a bit of a pain getting salespeople to adopt CRM,
Hmm.
but I've written articles on that as well. And one of the biggest things that I feel to get salespeople to adopt and then fulfill CRM requirements is to adopt a CRM that is mobile friendly. Right? What we've seen is a lot of people, and pre-pandemic, a lot of salespeople are on the move, and they tend to spend more time on their mobile. Mobiles tend to give you notifications and reminders as well. So, people are literally interacting with their CRM just the way they would react with any other app on their mobile. Um, and the moment that happens, um, a lot of things will fall into place. But the second important part of automation is that if leadership does not conduct sales reviews on the software, it's not going to get adopted.
Hmm.
And this is also one of the biggest problems I found across the board, irrespective of the size of the company, that a lot of reviews are held using various Excel sheets kept at different corners of the organization. There is no single source of data.
Hmm.
That single source of data has got to be the CRM system because both the frontline sales as well as the leadership team is sitting there. The moment reviews start getting held basis this, and the sales leadership maintains discipline in these reviews, the salespeople are going to update it no matter what,
Hmm.
right? Because their future depends on it. The fifth element of sales design is obviously the training and
Hmm.
education part. I feel I need to separate out training and education. I think a lot of emphasis is given in organizations related to training, but not enough to sales education. When I say sales education, I don't mean the tactical plays. I don't mean the soft skills. What I mean is giving people insight on how buying works,
Hmm.
right? So, for example, if you're targeting a large IT company for selling some of your services, what does the org structure of that company look like? Who are typically the key decision makers? Right? How do they buy? What are their idiosyncrasies? How does politicking happen inside the
Hmm.
organization? So on and so forth,
Hmm.
right? So that kind of sales education, apart from the tactical training, also needs to be there. Right? So this is the fifth element, and the last element of sales design, which uh, is again critical, is hiring and sales reps lifecycle management. I think we will keep complaining about attrition, and that one of the reasons is that they're not selecting sales reps who are fit for the particular line of service, the line of product, this length of the sales cycle. You're picking up, the kind of blunders I've seen is, and I would call them blunders. Feel free to disagree with me. Um, Picking up sales reps who have primarily B2C background and putting them in B2B.
Hmm.
I mean, to get the temperament of B2B takes a long time, and
Hmm.
B2C sales reps I've seen end up struggling with that. They've always sold short cycle products, so they don't have the patience to follow up for a long cycle sale, right?
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. So you get what I'm saying, right? You get the drift of what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Um, and with hiring, I've also included life cycle management because
Hmm.
nowadays we are dealing with a generation which
Hmm.
tends to get bored of their role very quickly.
Hmm.
They feel monotonous very, very quickly. And their life cycle management, their career management, their appraisals, their role design, their job design, etc., um, plays a very critical role in their motivation and hence, their output. So
Hmm.
these six elements of sales design, I think, have got to be uh, in place and in sync with each other so that this number can go up. Of course, I'm not giving a specific. I'm giving more of a framework rather than a
Yeah.
specific prescription.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Obviously, depending upon what kind of a company, what kind of industry, what is the maturity of the company in the industry, I think a lot of how you apply this will depend upon that. And what is the kind of, I mean, do they have 10-star sales guys or they have none? Will sort of dictate what they can do with what they have. Uh, but I totally understand what you're saying, and it sounds pretty comprehensive. And and the good part is I think the listeners would be able to sort of look at their own sales organization through this lens and see what makes sense and what doesn't, and
Yes.
and thereby focus on figuring it out. What I uh, what I possibly see, and maybe you didn't mention it, is the way we go about identifying prospects, right? Uh, so that's one thing I think has to come center stage into any framework that we talk of. So you did talk about ICP and defining the
Yes.
ICP, and moving from there. I think a lot more work and understanding needs to potentially go in there, and that's what will dictate what the marketing team or the long term, when you split the organization, what the long term goals would be looking like, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So Saurabh, this is a great chat, and like like these kind of discussions, it's very difficult to close it in like one sitting, right? They
Yes.
can actually, you can literally do six different discussions on 6 points that you had mentioned there, right? So I do look forward that we'll find time and we'll talk about these again. Thank you very
Absolutely.
much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your coming and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you for having me, Sumanjan. It was great talking to you.